Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Dave, we're living in the age of cancel culture. Has Pepe Le Pew, you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But he's the old cartoon, the little skunk.
The old skunk who couldn't take no from the female cat who looked like a skunk.
That's
is that,
right.
Is that what that whole thing was?
Yeah, in fact, usually in most of those old cartoons, the cat somehow by accident like runs under a streak of white paint, so it would have she looked like a skunk.
You know what's curious about that? So yes, Pepe Le Pew was canceled.
Oh,
He
he
was
was?
canceled right before Space Jam 2 was finalized. So Space Jam 2 was the flop of a Space Jam movie. Thank goodness. I would have been so upset if it had been a big box office hit.
Yeah.
They tried to remake Space Jam with LeBron James.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a joke. I mean, LeBron James will never be Michael Jordan. And
So,
the whole
Dave,
movie was very
that
PC.
means you're engaging in a little Schadenfreude, which is a great German word meaning you've taken some pleasure in the suffering or loss of someone else. You're happy that movie flopped.
When somebody does something that is unproductive and shouldn't be a part of our culture, I have no problem with it when the culture rejects it, right? It's foundations of capitalism. They put a product
That's
out
right.
there and it was completely rejected by the majority of people. But there was supposed to be a scene in that movie starring Pepe Le Pew, and they cut it. It ended up on the cutting room floor because at one point Warner Brothers decided Pepe Le Pew needs to be canceled. Now here's what's kind of interesting about that. Why did it get canceled? Did it get canceled because he was a cartoon skunk who was this very aggressive, a little rapey, if that's a word?
Now hold on, Dave. Pepe was also black.
He was also black.
Did they just cancel a black man?
He also is French.
That's right. Yes, he was French. That's why I forgot about that.
So
yes,
they canceled a black French
male
character.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the grounds were for canceling him.
Yeah.
What if the actor who played that skunk said, "Hey, you're canceling me because I'm this or I'm that."
Yeah. Well, in fact, it goes to I follow on social media Hannah Nicole Jones. She's the person who launched the 1619 Project at the New York Times.
You have a lot more patience than I do to be able to follow her.
I like to know what the influencers are doing. She's now a tenured professor at Howard University, tenured upon being hired. She was granted tenure before she ever taught a class. But I've noticed this now. There's a trend whenever anyone on social media highlights some mistake she's made, some lie that she has printed, and there are very many of them. Her response is some version of, "Oh, you just hate it when a black woman succeeds."
Right.
That's how when someone says, "Wait, you wrote this thing and this is patently false and here's the evidence," her response is, "You don't want a black woman to succeed." So maybe Pepe should say, "Oh, you just don't want a black colored male to succeed."
Well, it's just one more in a series of things that could never be again part of our culture.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was watching. Remember the movie Big?
Yeah.
With Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. I was watching that movie the other night. It was late.
Is that where they're twins?
Oh, sorry, not Big. Twins.
Twins.
Big is the Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah.
Big Twins is the Arnold Schwarzenegger Danny DeVito movie. And Danny DeVito is Pepe Le Pew in that movie. He's I mean, we all know what Danny DeVito looks like, right? He's maybe 5 feet tall on a good day with his lifts in his shoes.
Yep.
He's certainly not thin and fit.
Right.
He doesn't have a whole lot of hair on his head.
Well, put it this way, he was the perfect one to play Penguin in the Batman movie because he kind of has the shape of a penguin.
And one of the opening scenes of the movie is he's walking down the street and this tall blonde model actress, he's in LA, walks by and he immediately goes full-blown Pepe Le Pew on her. He turns around and he makes a beeline for her. And then somebody sent me another scene last night. Do you remember the movie Tropic Thunder?
Yes, I love that movie.
And
yes,
we were laughing at the Matthew McConaughey Tom Cruise scene back in the States when we find out that Ben Stiller had been taken hostage, and Tom Cruise is just, I mean, he's in a mild fat suit, and
Right.
he has these big fat forearms and fat hands, and he's bald, and I mean this look and the things he says, you just would never get away with. And these things aren't that long ago, right? I mean, the
Right.
Pepe Le Pew thing happened only a year and a half ago. It was early 2021.
Well, I suppose in a Me Too age, he's a little too sexually aggressive, right? For modern progressive culture. I mentioned Pepe because sometimes people ask what I do in my spare time, and what I've been doing in my spare time is dealing with skunks. I have a family of skunks that have moved in under the shed in my backyard, and it's actually kind of a real pain because we have 2 dogs. And now the dogs, the dogs won't just go outside and do their business, right? The dogs know there's something under the shed that shouldn't be there, and they go nuts. And of course, I don't want them to get sprayed. I don't want them to get bitten.
Right.
Skunks can carry rabies. So if anyone has any great ideas of some effective ways to remove skunks, I'd appreciate the help.
Well, here's what's interesting is that's one more area of government failure, right? One more area where the government, in a progressive world, the government should be there to take care of those things for you. And we could call animal control.
Yeah, I think my wife called animal control.
Right.
I don't think they'll come out and take care of the skunks.
They won't. We dealt with this at my parents' house a number of years ago. You can call them for an opossum. You can call them for raccoons. You can call them for anything else. You call them about a skunk and they say, nope,
no way.
Not our problem. That's all you. What kind of a progressive is this?
Yeah.
Well, they're a good bureaucrat who
Well,
knows exactly that they can say no and nobody can do anything about it.
It's proven to be a logistical problem because even if you, I don't want to box them in because I don't want them to die under there and then, start rotting and stinking. So I want them to get out and leave. We can't just kill one because they're all over the neighborhood. People are talking about there are lots of skunks in the Park Hill area of Denver. Even if you catch them, then you have the problem of you got to get rid of them. You got to put them in your car or something, right? And you drive them out to the country or do something with them. It's just a hassle. Anyway, that's how I've been spending my time lately.
And in all likelihood, if you put them in your car in a cage, they're going to spray.
Yeah, right.
It is going to smell for a very long time.
Imagine trying to get that smell out of a car interior.
Yeah, you need a pickup truck,
right?
That they can go in the back of the truck bed. But no, it's a certainly an issue I've dealt with before.
So that's what this time of year means at the Cranwitter house. It's a skunk, settlement season.
I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I kind of have this big smile on my face because for me this is the most wonderful time of the year. This is my the next 4 weeks or so are my absolute favorite time of the year. Really, usually for 2 reasons.
Yep.
One, we're gonna have to see. And I think you share this one with me. But the first is it's the start of the college basketball March Madness tournament, which I just think is the most fun thing to watch in sports.
Yeah.
And my team isn't in it this year. I'm pretty bummed about it. But there are some great storylines going in, and there's some interesting storylines from a business perspective as well.
I'm not a big college basketball fan. I don't dislike it. I've just never paid that much attention. I'll watch some of the tournament each year, but I want to do a shout out. There's a friend of mine I grew up with. His name is Donnie Brown. We used to play baseball together. He was in high school. Donnie had to have been at least 6'8". He was a giant. His son Christian is starting. He's one of the starting 5 for the University of Kansas basketball teams.
Christian is a serious basketball player. For those who don't follow University of Kansas, this isn't okay. He's just some kid on the end of the bench. Christian is an elite basketball player. And arguably the fan favorite on that team. He is. You talk to any true University of Kansas basketball fan, and we have a few members who are KU fans. I actually went to my first KU game at Allen Fieldhouse 2 years ago. Colorado went out to play Kansas. One of our members and I went out there, and it's a museum. I mean, James Naismith invented basketball there.
Right. Am I correct in remembering? I think basketball was invented as kind of an off-season exercise for football players, something like that, or am I confusing that?
That would be news to me. I didn't know that one. I guess I could see the connections a little bit.
Yeah.
So anyway, Christian, though, you talk to these KU fans, they will tell you he is one of the best leaders this team has ever seen.
Yeah.
He is one of the true captains, one of the guys that the basketball IQ is through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty impressive, the season he's put together. And I think he's only a junior. Well, you'll probably know better than I would.
So,
curious if he goes pro or not.
Shout out to my old friend Donnie Brown. I good luck to your son. This week in the coming tournament, I'll be rooting for him.
Absolutely. Well, I would like to root for him. I'm not exactly a Kansas fan.
Yeah.
I do think they have a really good shot. They're really good when they show up to play hard and play well. There is this other storyline, and I know that's not part of our normal podcast, but Mike Krzyzewski, who has been coaching Duke for 42 years, is retiring at the end of the season. I don't think we'll ever see a coach with a team for 42 years again. For those who don't know, Mike Krzyzewski came up through West Point. He's a military guy. He played for Bobby Knight, the old Indiana coach, the great Indiana coach. When Bobby Knight was the coach at West Point, and then Mike became the coach, and then eventually moved over to Duke. And in I want to say 1980 was his first season at Duke, 42 years ago, and has put together one of the all-time great careers by any coach. And for me personally, I would love nothing more than to see him go out on top.
Sure. Yeah, it would be a wonderful thing. Well, you mentioned all the great sports coming up here in the coming weeks. It's also going to be opening day of baseball in a few weeks.
It is. It's a little late, and that's why I said it's sort of falling towards the end of that.
Yeah.
End of that. For those who weren't paying attention or don't follow the sport, we just dealt with a result of socialism among sports. And I say that all the time. People can go back to that podcast we talked about where I have this real issue with the forgiveness that our government has given to the monopolies of sports.
Right.
And they have let them off the hook, and they run these monopolies. And because of that, you get these players who have very little choice. They have very little option of where they're going to play, who they're going to play for, what league they want to play in. There are no options. And what ended up happening, we had another lockout. These seem to now happen more and more often, and it's really a detriment to the game. But they did come back, and they finally came to a collective bargaining agreement. There's some interesting changes that are happening to baseball.
One of them, I'll admit, David, it sort of drives a stake through my heart. I've never been a fan of the designated hitter rule.
Right.
The American League adopted that. It was either 1972 or 1973. And of course, I'm a New York Yankees fan, so I'm an American League guy. That's one thing. It's always made me cringe a little bit. I've never liked it. I'm a purist when it comes to the game. I was hoping to see the designated rule go away.
Right.
Instead, it went the other direction. Now all of Major League Baseball has adopted it. So this will be the first season ever that the National League will have a designated hitter rule. Pitchers won't bat. The reason I joke about it driving a stake through my heart is I love the design of baseball, the actual game. Set aside professional. I don't care what level. I just think it's a gorgeous game. And especially in an era where you think of a sport like football, and every football team effectively is three separate teams. Mm-hmm. You have your offense, you have your defense, you have your special team, and there's very little crossover. Typically with an NFL team, the guys who play on offense are never, ever on the field at the same time when the defense is. They really are two separate teams with two separate coaching staffs. Baseball is a game where traditionally, if you're going to play out on defense, if you're going to go out on the field, then you're expected to hit. You're expected to play on offense as well, and that's going to change in the major league. Pitchers won't be hitting at all, or at least with very rare exceptions.
I'm going to take that concept a little further, and this might be a little bit too far in the weeds for people, but it is that time of year, and I'm in full swing baseball and basketball mode. The other part about baseball that makes what you just said really interesting is every other sport you can substitute in and out. And one of the great things you see in basketball, one of the things you see all the time is you see these players subbing in and out very quickly.
Yes.
I'm going to do my defensive sub, and then they're going to get the ball out of bounds. I'm going to call timeout. You get 8, 9 timeouts in basketball. I'm going to call timeout. I'm going to sub my offensive guys in the end of a game.
In baseball, you're done.
Yeah. once you pull a guy, you're not subbing all the time.
Right.
And so you do have to really think about, is my priority against this team in this situation, offense or defense? And some guys excel at both. And it really makes the teams have to think a little bit more. And it adds to the chess game that is baseball, which is, I think, why I love the sport so much.
Well, and I guess that what that really speaks to, it's an example, it's a particular example of the fact that incentives matter, right?
Yep.
When you design a game, when you design rules, when you design institutions in certain ways with certain incentives, it sort of makes sense why people make the choices that they make. If you change the rules, if you change the incentives, people are going to make different kinds of choices. That's one of our, that might become one of our mottos here at the Vino and Veritas Society. You know, a whole lot of people think Black Lives Matter. Well, it's also true. Incentives matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you say that, and that's how, when I get excited about the NCAA tournament, the incentives around the NCAA tournament, the incentives for these players, it's pure, it's true. It has been for years, right? You have all of these teams who, we call them mid-majors. They're the small schools that nobody pays any attention to from October until March 1st. Nobody pays any attention to the schools like Davidson.
I was just going to say that those smaller schools, it doesn't mean they don't produce some great players, because in the case of Davidson, arguably one of the best players in the NBA today came from that little school, Steph Curry.
Right. And he came from that school, but he was accepted there while he wasn't getting offers from Arizona, Kansas, Duke, the big schools, UCLA, because he was too little. He coming out of high school, he hadn't hit a growth spurt yet.
Yep.
His dad was an NBA All-Star. We all thought, okay, he's gonna grow eventually, but nobody. You're looking at this kid. He was 5'11", maybe 6 foot, little Danny DeVito-esque. and
at least by NBA
standards, he certainly didn't have. He was a little skinnier than Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
But the whole idea was, you have these schools, and these players have the opportunity to come out and really show what they're capable of, and it makes the tournament fun. It makes it interesting. You have these teams who are, you look at a place like the University of Kentucky, who is a perennial great team.
Yep.
The coach, John Calipari at Kentucky, his philosophy is, I'm going to get the NBA ready players. I'm going to get the guys who could be playing in the NBA right out of high school, which, talk about the monopoly of sports. The fact that the NBA doesn't allow players to come straight out of high school, it's another one of these things that we could talk about.
Right.
Bad incentives or manipulation of markets that they get away with. But Calipari's...
Well, I just want to put a little, emphasis on that. What that means is you have a professional organization like the NBA, in a way, is helping to prop up the existing world of higher education.
Right.
The big schools, the NCAA schools, right? Because the NBA is saying, you're not allowed to come. We won't hire you. It doesn't matter how good you are unless you go spend time at one of those universities.
Well, and put that in context of regular work for every other American on this planet.
Right.
What if somebody was just an amazing electrician?
Right.
There was something about that type of science that just made sense to them, and coming out of high school, they had been come up in their maybe their parents owned an electrician business, and they were doing that, and they were great. And all of a sudden, you have some high level company that needs an electrical engineer, and this person is brilliant.
Yeah.
And there's a rule among all of the companies that say, no, I know you're the best.
Right.
I know you would be the best electrical engineer we'd ever have. We're not allowed to hire you. We're not allowed to bring you in. You've got to go do a year of college first.
Right.
Because that's going to make all the difference in the world, right?
Right.
You're going to get a year of college. What it really does is it gets them a year of indoctrination in our progressive university system. So you get these incentives for a lot of these players is to come in and win. A lot of these guys, there's no future in the NBA. They don't have the size. They don't have the You think about the scope of college basketball versus the NBA. I think people sometimes don't realize how hard it is to make it to professional basketball. You have 365 college basketball teams in Division I and Division I AA, and there are 32 NBA teams. and there's only 2 rounds of the NBA draft, and
Right.
most of the second rounders never make it.
Right.
So you're really getting 32 guys out of 365 teams making it to the NBA. So what's the incentive for these guys? It's memories, it's opportunities, it's relationships, it's building a name for yourself, and doing something special, having that moment that you can look back on. And it's created some unbelievable moments in the history of sports that I just think are amazing.
Well, and we're seeing, right, we're going to see some changes in those rules and those incentives. One of the most obvious ones, COVID related, right? There's some big change the last, 2 years? I don't even remember. Did they do the tournament 2 years ago, or was it without people in the stands?
I believe the tournament was canceled 2 years ago, and then it was in empty stadiums last year.
So this tournament is back, I assume, to something close to normal. People are going to be in the stadiums. I think they have a rule. If a team has some breakout with COVID, then I believe they're just disqualified, right? Period. They forfeit and they're gone.
And that team just gets to move on.
Right. But other than that, they're going to be playing in arenas full of people. So that'll be a good thing.
It will. The bigger thing is going to be the change in incentives for players, though. And I think that's something worth getting into a little bit here. And that's the incentive of being able to, for the first time in college sports history, players can now sell their name, image, and likeness. They call it NIL licensing. You can go out and you can do endorsement deals. You can sell your name. You're allowed to go out and endorse a product or go and endorse a business.
As a college student athlete. So you can be a sophomore, junior, and if, I don't know, some Nike or Adidas comes along and says, we want to pay you money to put your face on our tennis shoes, the players are allowed to take that deal now, right?
Absolutely. And it's such a change from history. A couple of moments in history we can look back on. Ohio State football a handful of years ago had to relinquish their national championship because 3 players gave merchandise in exchange that they didn't actually own.
Yeah.
They traded merchandise for free tattoos. That was all it was. They got free tattoos to be able to, so that the tattoo parlor could say, hey, your favorite players on the football team,
they have our tattoos.
That's where they came, where they came. So you should come here too. And free tattoos were considered a gift.
Right.
They were considered an illegal gift. And the football team had to give up their national championship because 3 players got free tattoos.
Wow.
So you had some of that. Yeah. More personally for me, I grew up with Jeremy Bloom, same circles as Jeremy Bloom. I don't want to paint a picture that we're good buddies
Didn't
or anything like that.
Didn't you teach him how to ski?
Yeah. There's a great movie related called Molly's Game, if anybody hasn't seen it.
Okay.
That's about his sister, who was also a phenomenal skier.
Okay. She
and I were in political science classes together in college. Definitely didn't agree. She would not like our podcast, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So Jeremy Bloom, for those who don't know, grew up here in Colorado, in Loveland, up near Fort Collins. And was the best skier in the world. He was, from a mogul competition standpoint, he was the best skier in the world. And Jeremy was also a top level NFL quality wide receiver and kick returner for football.
Okay.
And the Olympics have their amateur rules. They always have, but there are certain sports where they allow endorsement deals because the sport costs a lot of money to compete in. Skiing is one of those.
Skiing was one of those, yeah.
So Jeremy Bloom had several skiing endorsement deals, ski company, a boot company, a jacket company, things like that.
Right.
And because of that, the NCAA ruled at that time, you're getting endorsed for skiing. Therefore, it's a violation of our policy for football. You have to quit the football team or give up your skiing endorsements. And he took this all the way up to the highest court.
So he had an endorsement in his Olympic skiing career.
Correct.
And then University of Colorado comes along and says, whoa. If you want to play football during football season, you have to get rid of that endorsement.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
And it was multiple endorsements. And it's impossible to compete in skiing without those endorsement deals. The cost is astronomical because you're flying all over the country, all over the world, really. And then the cost of equipment. These pro skiers It's not like they have one pair of skis like you or I might,
Sure.
right? I mean, it's like watching those tennis players who trade out their rackets every other game.
Yep.
These skiers are constantly updating equipment and using different things, and depending on the conditions, what do they use? So it just wasn't an option. And he had to give up football for his last year of college, but then ended up playing in the NFL for 2 years. So it just shows how all of that worked. Now this has become legal. And I've been contemplating how that's going to affect the incentives of players in this tournament.
Well, coming back to this foundational idea that incentives matter, incentives, change behaviors. I would think that we could basically think of this as, two kind of options. On the one hand, there's the principle of individual liberty, of private property, right? Each of us, we own ourselves, our face, our talents, all of that. And we at the Vino and Veritas Society, of course, we agree with that. So the conclusion would be if someone offers to pay a student athlete for something, for some kind of endorsement, and it doesn't have to be a high level. It could be a high level, but it could also be something, well, you mentioned the local tattoo parlor, right? So I'll pay you in some free tattoos so that we can brag about your wearing our tattoos. If someone wants to offer some money to a student athlete, that student athlete should be free, right? He owns his own property, his own talents, should be free to accept the offer. There's the case for individual liberty.
The same way any other student would be allowed to, right? If you're a student who's a great artist,
right?
There's no one who would prevent you from doing art for Nike,
right?
Or for Nike saying, "Hey, you did this great thing. Can we buy it and use it and use it in our promotions?"
Yeah.
So there have been different rules for regular students versus student athletes, and everybody knows I love going back to South Park. If you've been watching this, this is one of the all-time great episodes. Cartman decides to start a basketball league, and he's trying to use them as you get players who don't really get a say, right? They're amateur athletes as opposed to professional athletes, so he doesn't have to pay them.
Right.
And he outright calls them slaves over and over and over again.
Right.
And there's a great scene where he walks into the president's office at the University of Colorado, right? South Park is based here. And he's dressed as this old Texas oil man. And he's got his hat on, and he's got his boots on and a bolo tie. And he's talking to him with the accent. I'm not even going to try the accent, but he says, "How do you keep your slaves? How do you get away with using slaves? I need to know. I need to better understand how you use slaves."
Right.
And the president of the school looks at him and goes, "You mean our student athletes?" He goes, "Student athletes?" And he's processing.
Right.
And they're making the argument that the way student athletes were treated in college was the same as slavery.
Yeah. A case certainly can be made, a powerful case on the basis of individual liberty, private property. Now, the other side of this would be, right, there is an argument that if you're a student and you decide to join a university, go to school there, the university, and of course, the individual university, not only it has its own rules and policies, but they're also part of bigger organizations like the NCAA.
Correct.
So from the point of view of the school could say, look, we're making you this offer. You can come here to school and we'll offer you this scholarship. And if you want to play basketball or any other sport, here's our offer, but you have to comply with our policies.
Mm-hmm.
And our policy says no endorsement. And if you don't like that, you're free to decline the offer and go do something else.
The problem with that has always been, and this goes back to my same conversation about monopolies at the professional level as well. They don't have other options. And what we see is governing bodies, central planning, governing bodies.
Yeah.
This doesn't just happen in the U.S. government. We have these governing regulators, bureaucrats at the NCAA, and every school is a part of the NCAA. You don't have other leagues. You don't have other places to go. You have to wonder what goes on behind some of these closed doors. There have been people who have said, we're going to go start something else. We're going to go try something different.
Mm-hmm.
They never can get TV contracts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could go out and say, I'm going to start a basketball league for anybody who doesn't want to go to college, but the NBA won't allow them to play yet. You will get 30, 40, 50 of the best players in the country. You
Really
will get
good.
some of the best basketball. They never get a TV contract.
Right.
They never get the opportunity to be seen. They can't pay these guys anything because they can't get sponsors. Why? Because the NBA and the NCAA would say, if you go do anything with that league, we're out.
We're out. And, and this goes all the way to the institutions of colleges and universities. Dave, if you and I want to go start our own college, and there are many good reasons, right? If we say, look, we've examined the world of higher education. It's so corrupt. It's so progressive. It's so politically correct. It's so nihilistic. We're going to go start our own college and offer a serious, legitimate, classical kind of education. We would run into, it would be almost impossible to do. We'd run into one huge obstacle after another, not least of which is when we talk about monopolies, and the effects of central planning, these big, agencies. In the world of higher education, you run into accreditation.
Right.
There are just a few national accreditation agencies, and if you want your university to be viewed as respectable, you got to be accredited. And typically what the accreditation means is they come and examine your school. They'll spend a few weeks, maybe a few months on campus, and they go through your books and they see how you run your school. And the purpose is to make sure that your school is sufficiently progressive, that you have some diversity and equity, staff member and that kind of nonsense. But if you decided to forego that, if you said, no, I positively disagree with what accreditation stands for, I don't want to comply with that, I want to go start my own university or college, it would be virtually impossible, because people from the outside, right, they would be looking at your school and say, well, why would I spend money and time, invest time in your university when it's not accredited, right? No one's gonna honor that degree.
Well, I'm going to take that a step further and compare it to the sponsorship and TV stuff I was just talking about. I'm going to make an assumption. You tell me if I'm correct. Accreditation agencies likely have lobbyists working for them.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And those lobbyists are going to politicians and saying, you got to make sure that we're protected.
It gets even better. A lot of people who work within the accreditation agencies used to work at the Department of Education.
Shocking.
And vice versa. Yeah, right.
So you have these accreditation agencies who are closely tied in with government, closely tied in with unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats.
Yes.
And they have an interest in self-defense, in lasting, in being an important part of the education system.
Sure.
What's the biggest threat to an accreditation agency? A college that's successful without being accredited.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Bingo.
That is their biggest fear.
Yes.
So what happens the minute that they start seeing Dr. Tom Krannawitter starts this great new college, and all of a sudden it starts to become really popular and everybody wants to go there. All of a sudden, I bet you start seeing licensing questions coming up.
Right.
You start seeing permitting issues.
Yep.
You start seeing people coming into your school and cutting holes in your wall to make sure that your electricity is wired properly according to their rules, that your pipes are the right distance apart, that you have all
these things,
that your handicap. We've been talking about public accommodation laws for the last couple of weeks.
There's a financial piece here, direct financial piece as well. I think many people who listen to this podcast probably know that I did spend a spot of time at Hillsdale College. I used to teach there, and at Hillsdale, it's one of the only colleges in the country that refuses all federal funding. So you think of all those federal programs like the GI Bill for military people and the federal Pell Grant, federal Stafford loans.
Yeah.
All those things, Hillsdale does not accept them. You can't use them there. Now, Hillsdale makes up for that. They go and raise money so that they can offer their own scholarships and grants and loan programs and things like that. But I mention that because, Hillsdale is a small little college, and it's one of, there are about 2,500 4-year degree granting colleges and universities in the country. All the rest of them, they do participate in those federal funding programs. And the federal funding program they say to qualify for these federal programs, you must be accredited.
Right.
So there's the federal government saying, if you want your students to have access to these grants and these loans and things like that, you have to be accredited. And then, of course, the accreditation agencies are, basically in bed with the Federal Department of Education. It's all progressives all over the place.
So it all comes back to this idea of central planning and control.
Yes.
And everything comes down to that.
And trying to destroy, really, or discredit anyone who tries to operate outside that paradigm, outside that arena.
Well, so back to the college sports area, anybody who's ever tried to take a step outside of the standard operating model of college athletics has been pushed back, whether it's a separate league. There was even talk at one point, I want to say it was Florida State University, who's a really serious athletic department.
Right.
There was talk at one point about Florida State trying to privatize their athletic department, that they would stay a part of the NCAA or they would play against NCAA teams, but none of the employees of the athletic department would be employees of the school. It would be a totally separate business, a for-profit venture that could pay the players, that the players would go work for that business. The sponsors would sponsor that business, and they would all be hired privately. It was just they were going to share an affiliation of name, but it was going to operate independently of the school.
You just said a dirty word, Dave, for many progressives. You just said the word profit. Wouldn't that be the source of corruption and bad incentives and control?
Well, the problem is, it's where does the profit go?
Yeah.
Right? In all of these schools. And again, I'm a Colorado guy. My family's been at the University of Colorado for 3 generations, and I've watched this closely. Colorado, the athletic department currently, they are giving tens of millions of dollars a year to academics, to administration. You have to get, for a coach, if you want to give the coach more money,
right?
It's not the athletic director's decision of how much to pay the coach. They don't have their own budget that they got to operate under. Instead, they have to go to the regents and they have to go to the chancellor and the president and say, we would like to give the coach more money. Will you vote to allow us to? We would like to hire a coach for more money. Right. Would you allow us to? And what are those administrators thinking? You're taking $10 million out of our budget. You're taking $90 million out of our budget. You can't spend it there.
Right.
You can't give that coach more money. That needs to come to me. And so you get these, again, perverse incentives that just screw this whole thing up, where it hurts the athletes, and in the long run, it hurts the programs. Now, incentives have changed with this name, image, and likeness deal. And you said it earlier. I'm all on board with that. I do believe it is. These students it's their private property. It's their name. It's their face. There have been several lawsuits. There was the Jeremy Bloom lawsuit. There was another lawsuit several years ago that went all the way to a federal court, to a high federal court, about a video game maker who was using players' names and numbers in the game,
right,
in a college basketball game. And the game maker, the NCAA, said, you have to pay us. Forget the players.
Right.
You have to pay us. And they just said, forget it. We're done. We're just going to stop making the game altogether.
Well, bring this back to we've been talking about the March Madness, the tournament. So are we going to see these changes in rules with name, face, likeness? Is that going to change some of the incentives that we're going to see? Is it going to affect what we're going to see on the court?
I think that's what I'm looking out for the most during this tournament. Is it going to change how people approach it? And how does a 18, 19, 20-year-old college kid who is looking at potentially a lot of money, how does that change the way he approaches the game on the court? And let's look at some examples of that. So on the one hand, you've got those 15 or 20 players who are these guys are the surefire NBA guys.
Yeah.
They're fighting for positioning in the draft. You're looking for that guy who comes in and really makes a difference in the draft. There have been a few players who weren't even in the first round radar and had these unbelievable tournaments.
Right.
And all of a sudden they get drafted high up in the NBA draft. So you do have those 15 to 20 players where that's going to make a difference. But for everyone else, it was purely about winning. It was purely about team. It was purely about, this is my last basketball experience. I'm not going to get to play in the NBA. Right. I want this to be the most memorable experience I can. And so I want to win. What happens when all of a sudden you might have this chance to hit a game-winning shot that now somebody might pay you for rights to that video, right? You own your name, image, and likeness. If you hit that game-winning shot, if you make that game-winning block, if you do something special in a game that is spectacular. I mean, this is where things like NFTs, these digital assets that people are selling, and that's a whole other conversation that I know a lot of people don't even know what to do with right now. But in that cryptocurrency space, you can own a digital right to video, to one of these opportunities. And so are these kids all of a sudden who are saying, you know, I'm going to go be a teacher. I'm going to go be something that's not going to pay me a lot of money. But if I do something really good in this tournament, if I do something really special,
which may not be the same as the team winning.
Well, right. So what if you're not the best shooter on the team? And what if the coach draws up a play and says, the end of the game, we have Steph Curry, we're Davidson, we're this small school, and we're within a point at the end of the game, and we have the ball. I want the ball going to Steph Curry because he's the best shooter on the planet. And then you have somebody else on the team who's sitting there, I really want that opportunity.
This is my moment.
This is my chance. Or if I do something in this moment, maybe I can transfer to a school that's going to actually help me get an endorsement deal next year if you're younger.
Speaking of, you were telling me a story, I think it was the University of Texas. Well, you go ahead and tell the details. I think that they're offering endorsement deals, right, is it to all the players who decide to play there?
For football at the moment.
Okay.
The way this is all worked out, the players still can't have agents, right? They're allowed to sell their name, image, and likeness, but they're not allowed to hire agents.
Okay.
So how many 18-year-old kids know how to go get a hold of somebody at Nike, and actually say, hey, you should endorse me, or you should let me endorse you.
Right.
And beyond that, Nike doesn't want calls from 10 to 12 kids at 365 schools, all trying to pitch them on why they should be endorsing Nike. So without an agent, and without somebody filtering that through and actually creating those transactions, the schools have been allowed to step in and do that, right? So the schools can help you connect with different people. There's all kinds of different programs at different schools. Everybody's kind of trying to figure out, how do we set it up? A lot of people don't realize this. The University of Texas put Matthew McConaughey on the payroll in their athletic department.
One of my favorite actors, by the way.
Absolutely.
I love him in his movies.
And he's a University of Texas grad. He's a diehard Texas fan, and they basically made him a cheerleader. He is basically part of the cheerleading squad. He shows up before games and he does pep talks to the team before games. He'll stand on the sidelines and go have conversations with players.
Right.
He gets to know the players, and it's sort of that draw to get people to come to Texas. Well, what they've also done is they've also started sending Matthew McConaughey out into the community, out into some of these bigger companies that would never let you or I or one of the players or even one of the coaches into their marketing department to have a conversation. They're not turning down Matthew McConaughey's request, and he's gone in and he's started negotiating deals along with some of the people in the marketing department, and they're spreading that money among all the players. And there's no real reporting system yet for all of this, nor do I know that there should be, right? If we're talking free markets, I don't like the whole idea of a reporting, but where it's going to get to is they're saying that each player who ends up on the University of Texas football team could be making as much as $50,000 a year the day they step on campus.
Now, if that's happening right now, and this is very early in this new regime, we should expect that those numbers are quickly good. More schools are going to adopt that kind of program, and probably we're going to see those numbers go up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So part of what this means, right? I mean, we can call it an endorsement deal for all these players. It sure looks like a salary, right? And so it means a kind of professionalization of what used to be amateur sports.
Well, and that's where these incentives about where does a kid want to go to school? You start to question the incentives, and I think my biggest worry about this, and I am all in favor of this, and set aside some of the other issues. I think the biggest fear is kids and parents not understanding the realities of where they're at. I think a lot of us know these parents, and I coached baseball and basketball for a number of years at a high school level. There are a lot of parents out there who think my kid is the greatest athlete on the planet.
Sure.
And their kid never plays a plays it down a football or gets a minute on the basketball court. Not everybody is your friend's son Christian, right? Like it just doesn't happen that way. And you start getting parents saying, nope, you're going to this school, forget the academics, your focus is sports and going to this school to get this opportunity.
Right.
At the same time, there's this whole question here about what does that mean for the future of college sports as a business? And I know a lot of people are sitting there saying, I know it's these are private property issues, but I don't like it because it's going to ruin sports.
Right.
And for the time being, it definitely is. You're going to see the haves and the have-nots. You're going to see in basketball and football, the schools that have these amazing alumni bases who have a lot of money, or the people like Texas who have Matthew McConaughey going out and doing that.
Versus the schools that don't.
Right. Colorado's best bet is to get Matt Stone and Trey Parker from South Park to go out pitching. And you might they just bought the restaurant Casa Bonita for those in town who know that.
I will say this. I mean, couple observations here as we get close to wrapping up. One is I've never bought into the idea that money itself equates to success in sports. As a baseball fan, it wasn't that long ago when the Kansas City Royals, this is one of the smallest budget teams in all of Major League Baseball, they went to the World Series 2 years in a row. And they lost the first time, and then they won. They were world champions.
Well, take that to the most commonly known story of that, and that's Moneyball.
Yeah.
Right. That's the Billy Beane Oakland A's story. Yes. They lose everybody to the Yankees, and all of a sudden they're this market that I think they had a $36 billion payroll against the Yankees 200 plus.
And they won, what was it, 21 games in a row that summer.
And set came a game short of the all-time record for most wins in a season.
Yeah. And by the way, it was a great movie. If people haven't seen that, Moneyball is the title of the movie starring Brad Pitt. And it's actually a really good movie. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is a subject we're going to have to come back to, but if people are wondering why are we talking so much about sports, we're talking about sports because we're talking about the incentives and how incentives really, really do influence the choices that people make. And this is true throughout life. This is true in our personal lives, in our business lives, in our political lives. Many problems we're wrestling with today in the United States are because we have adopted public policies and we've adopted government programs that create very perverse incentives. They reward bad behavior in many ways. And for those of us who are interested in these subjects, nobody really thought more deeply about incentives and how institutional and programmatic designs influence incentives than the American founders.
Right.
When they were sitting down hammering out the Constitution, they were thinking through what kind, if we create a legislative body this way or that way, right? What incentives are we encouraging? What incentives are we disencouraging? This sort of thing. So the study of American politics really is the study of incentives and policy design.
Well, and it's hard to argue if the American founders thought the most about incentives, the group that thought that was next on that list were the early progressives.
Oh, sure.
How do we change incentives for Americans so that they want central planning, so they want government control, so they want to give us power and money and authority?
That's right.
The other reason I think it's important to have this conversation is this is one of those conversations, and I know not everybody is a sports fan and not everybody gets into these things, but it's one of those conversations that it challenges your ability to stick to principle. And do you really believe in the things that you claim to? And one of those things is, do you believe in the goodness of a free market? Do you believe that a free market inevitably will correct itself and will lead to the best outcomes? And if you believe in that principle, if you truly are a capitalist, this is going to be a hard time. For the short term, sports are going to get weird. College sports are going to incentives are going to change. People are going to make some bad decisions. We're going to see some haves and have-nots. We might even see a complete failure of the NCAA, which, side note, wouldn't be so bad. But
the point is, we're going to see a sudden injection of a lot of money in a realm that hasn't had that kind of money, not in that way.
Right. And because of that incentive, we're going to see a lot of different things happening. You're going to see this divide start to occur between a certain group of schools and a certain group of other schools.
Yeah.
And you're going to see changes in the landscape of college sports. However, if you believe in the free market, if you believe in true capitalism, businesses tend to correct themselves over the long term. This will end up working out for the best. It will force some schools to start doing things differently. It will start forcing schools to focus on what they do well and what they can do well versus where they can't compete.
I'll put it sort of in terms of in the language that an economist would use. What happens over time, so long as there's some competition, is businesses tend to provide value, the value people actually want. And if they don't, if they fail to provide that value, they suffer the consequences of that.
And if you get the right people, they tend to figure out how to provide that value. And what we're going to end up seeing is we're going to see a lot of collaboration. And that's the beautiful part, right? We talk so much in this world about people think, oh, if you're a capitalist and it's about profit, then you want to destroy every business around you, and you are only out for yourself, and you're this threatening, individualistic, conservative, whatever. But in reality, when you get into one of these situations where you've got a few haves and a whole lot of have-nots, those have-nots start to say, how can we collaborate to do something great? I don't like quoting him, but it's the old JFK line, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? And you are going to find people learning how to work together, learning how to collaborate, learning how to do things better as a group in order to succeed in a changing business landscape.
Is it a good summary of this discussion, Dave, to say that incentives really do matter? And maybe some of the more graphically talented of our members might come up with a way, that Black Lives Matter sign that's been so prominent the last couple of years. Maybe we come up with our own version that says incentives matter, to spark some deeper thinking.
To our new merchandising director, if she's listening, think about that
incentives
for a minute.
Matter.
Absolutely. And knowing incentives matter you talked about it. It was a core idea for the founders of this country. It's a core piece of understanding. In order to think like the founders, you have to understand incentives and understand how they impact decisions. And if we're going to guard the American idea, you have to start with incentives.
And we're going to keep talking about this subject in a lot of other different contexts, because we're here to guard the American idea.
And for everybody who is into the basketball tournament, I hope you enjoy it. It should be a fun one, no matter what.
Yep.
And as we watch, we'll continue to guard the American idea. No somos custodes.
Till next time.